October 25, 1944, off the eastern coast of Samar, Philippine Sea. The first light of dawn revealed a quiet horizon. Low clouds hung over the water, broken in places by pale streaks of morning light. The sea rolled gently, long swells moving beneath a scattered formation of small American ships. These were not the heavy units of a fleet built for decisive battle. There were no battleships here, no fleet carriers, no thick armor, only escort carriers and destroyers. This was Task Unit 77.4.3, known simply as Taffy 3. At 6:37, the stillness ended. Lookouts aboard the escort carrier Fanshawe Bay reported shapes on the northern horizon. At first, they were indistinct, dark silhouettes against the morning haze. But within minutes, their outlines sharpened. Tall masts, massive superstructures, gun turrets the size of small buildings. They were not American. They were the approaching ships of the Imperial Japanese Navy's Center Force, commanded by Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, and among them were some of the most powerful warships ever built, including the battleship Yamato. Taffy 3 had stumbled directly into the path of a force designed to annihilate invasion fleets. The Japanese formation advancing toward them consisted of 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. Their guns ranged up to 18.1 inches, the largest naval artillery ever deployed at sea. Their armor could withstand punishment that would obliterate smaller ships. By comparison, Taffy 3's escort carriers displaced barely a fraction of that tonnage. Their primary role was to provide air support for ground forces landing on Leyte. Their aircraft were lightly armed, often configured for ground attack rather than anti-ship combat. Their destroyers, nicknamed tin cans, were fast, lightly armored, and designed primarily for screening and escort duties. They were not built to fight battleships. Yet, that is exactly what was about to happen. Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, commanding Taffy 3, understood the situation immediately. The Japanese had achieved complete tactical surprise. There was no time to withdraw in an orderly fashion, no time to call for reinforcements. The nearest heavy American units were too far away to intervene in time. Sprague gave the only order possible. All ships make smoke, turn south, launch all aircraft. The escort carriers began turning into the wind, launching planes as quickly as possible. Pilots were sent into the air regardless of armament. Some carried depth charges. Others had only machine guns. It did not matter. Anything that could fly was launched. Meanwhile, the destroyers and destroyer escorts moved into position. Among them was the USS Johnston, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Ernest E. Evans. Evans was a Cherokee officer, known among his crew for his direct manner and aggressive instincts. Before the battle, he had addressed his men with unusual clarity. "This is going to be a fight against overwhelming odds," he had said, "but we will do what damage we can." Now, that moment had arrived. Without waiting for orders, Johnston turned toward the enemy. At approximately 7 o'clock, the first Japanese shells began to fall. Columns of water rose around the American ships as ranging shots bracketed the formation. The sound came seconds later, a deep, rolling thunder that carried across the sea. The range was closing rapidly. Johnston accelerated to flank speed, over 34 knots, and charged directly toward the approaching cruisers. Smoke poured from her stacks as she laid a thick screen to obscure the carriers behind her. At 7:16, she opened fire. Her 5-inch guns began firing rapidly, targeting the leading Japanese cruiser. The shells were small compared to the enemy's armor, but they were accurate. Within minutes, hits were observed. Then Evans ordered torpedoes launched. The torpedo attack was a critical gamble. To reach effective range, Johnston had to close within approximately 10,000 yards, well inside the engagement envelope of enemy heavy guns. Japanese shells began landing closer. One struck Johnston amidships, tearing through her hull and knocking out power to several systems. Another hit destroyed part of her bridge structure. Despite the damage, Evans maintained course. At 7:24, Johnston launched a full spread of torpedoes. Moments later, One struck the heavy cruiser Kumano, blowing off her bow and forcing her out of formation. It was the first major disruption to the Japanese advance, but Johnston had revealed her position. Enemy ships concentrated fire. Shells struck repeatedly. The ship lost power. Steering was impaired. Fires broke out across multiple compartments. Evans was wounded. Still, the ship did not withdraw. Elsewhere, other destroyers of Taffy 3 were moving into action. USS Hull, USS Hermann, each one advancing into overwhelming firepower. Their mission was not to destroy the enemy fleet outright. It was to delay, to confuse, to buy time. Above them, the aircraft launched from the escort carriers began arriving over the battlefield. They attacked without coordination. Some pilots dove on battleships armed only with machine guns. Others dropped depth charges set to shallow detonation. A few carried bombs intended for land targets. The effect was not decisive in terms of damage, but it was constant, relentless. Japanese gunners were forced to divide their attention between surface targets and aerial threats. Formation cohesion began to break down. At approximately 800, the battle reached its most intense phase. The Japanese fleet had closed within visual range of the escort carriers. Shells began landing dangerously close to the carriers themselves. USS Gambier Bay was hit repeatedly by cruiser gunfire. Her speed dropped. Fires spread. She fell behind the formation. Meanwhile, the destroyers continued their attacks. USS Hull charged into range and launched torpedoes under heavy fire. She was struck multiple times but maintained course until her weapons were expended. Then she continued firing her guns until she was no longer able. Back aboard Johnston, damage control teams fought to keep the ship operational. Despite severe flooding and loss of power, temporary systems were restored. Guns resumed firing intermittently. Evans, still wounded, remained in command. The Japanese formation, though still powerful, was no longer advancing in a coordinated manner. Reports of torpedo attacks, airstrikes, and unexpected resistance created confusion. Admiral Kurita faced an uncertain tactical picture. He had expected minimal opposition. Instead, he was encountering aggressive resistance from multiple directions. At 9 o'clock, the situation shifted. Kurita made a decision. He ordered a general withdrawal. The most powerful surface fleet remaining to Japan turned away from a force of escort carriers and destroyers. The battle was over. Taffy 3 had suffered severe losses. Several ships were sunk, including USS Gambier Bay and multiple destroyers. Hundreds of sailors were lost, but the invasion forces off Leyte Gulf remained intact. The Japanese attack had failed. The withdrawal order did not bring immediate silence. Even as Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita turned his force northward, the exchange of fire continued in scattered bursts. Some Japanese cruisers, already committed to their attack runs, maintained course for several more minutes before breaking away. Others fired sporadically through gaps in the smoke, their targets no longer clearly visible. For the men of Taffy 3, there was no clear signal that the battle had ended. Aboard the destroyer USS Johnston, the situation had become unsustainable. Power was failing again. Flooding had spread through multiple compartments, and the list to port was increasing. Lieutenant Commander Ernest E. Evans continued to direct what remained of his ship's fighting ability, shifting fire manually where systems no longer responded. Nearby, USS Hull had already been reduced to a burning hull. After sustaining dozens of hits, she lost propulsion and drifted under continued fire before finally sinking beneath the surface. Survivors were left in the water as the battle moved beyond them. USS Hermann, though damaged, remained operational. She continued to maneuver aggressively, laying smoke and maintaining the appearance of a larger, coordinated defense. Her actions, like those of the others, contributed to the uncertainty that had taken hold within the Japanese formation. At approximately 9:20, USS Gambier Bay capsized and sank. She had been the only American carrier sunk by surface gunfire during the entire Pacific War. Her loss marked the cost of the delay that had been imposed on the enemy. The sea, once defined by movement and noise, began to settle. Aircraft that had been launched earlier now circled back, low on fuel. Some landed on alternate carriers. Others ditched in the water near friendly ships. Rescue operations began almost immediately, despite the continued risk of submarine presence and drifting debris. By mid-morning, it was clear that the Japanese center force had fully disengaged. The invasion shipping in Leyte Gulf, transports, supply vessels, and landing craft remained untouched. What had begun as a sudden encounter had ended as a failed offensive. The outcome had not been determined by firepower alone. It had been shaped by timing, by visibility, and by decisions made under pressure, often with incomplete information. A force designed for escort duty had held its position long enough to alter the course of a larger operation. The cost had been significant, but the objective had been preserved.